Families of hostages feel hope and anxiety as they await news of loved ones' potential release. After enduring nearly 7 weeks of uncertainty about the fate of family members kidnapped by Hamas, relatives of hostages were left with hope and a new set of anxieties after Israel and the militant group reached a breakthrough deal on Tuesday that will see a 4-day humanitarian pause to allow the release of at least 50 Israeli women and children. One family told CNN they face a terrible week ahead as they wait to learn whether their loved ones will be among the hostages released. "My family, like all the other families, is going to go through a terrible week. We don't know if my cousin is going to be amongst those released in this round," Maya Roman, the cousin of a female hostage, told CNN. On October 7, Roman's cousin, Yarden Roman Gat, 36, handed her 3-year-old daughter to her husband, hoping he could run faster as they tried to flee Hamas gunmen. Her husband and child were able to escape, but Yarden has been missing ever since. "As it seems, we're going to have to wait and see every day who are going to be released the following day, and that's going to be extremely hard," Roman continued, adding it's causing a lot of tensions among the different families. While the exact names of the hostages to be released has yet to be publicized by the government. Officials say those freed will be Israeli, some of whom have dual nationality. The Israeli military says Hamas is holding roughly 240 hostages in Gaza, including foreign nationals from dozens of countries, who were taken during the October 7 attack. Among the dual nationals is Abigail Eden, a 3-year-old Israeli-American who was orphaned when her parents were killed by Hamas. Liz Hirsch Naftali, Eden's great-aunt, told CNN about the excruciating wait to hear if her great-niece is coming home. "For our family, we have spent the last 7 weeks worrying, wondering, praying, hoping," she said. The family is holding on to hope that Abigail will be one of the first to be released. Abigail is the youngest American hostage. She has a 6-year-old sister and 10-year-old brother, who saw their parents being murdered on October 7, Naftali said. "They hid in a closet for 14 hours, she said. "The one thing that we all hold on to is that hope now that Abigail comes home. She comes home by Friday," she said. "Friday is her 4th birthday. We need to see Abigail come out and then we will be able to believe it." BTS members RM, Jimin, V and Jung Kook enlist for South Korean military service. 4 more members of South Korean boy band BTS are set to start their compulsory military service as the group's hiatus continues. This means all 7 members of BTS are now either serving in the South Korean military or in the process of enlisting. "We would like to inform our fans that RM, Jimin, V, and Jung Kook have initiated the military enlistment process," the band's music label Big Hit Music wrote in a statement. "The artists are preparing to fulfill their military service duties. We will inform you of further updates in due course," it added. "We ask you for your continued love and support for RM, Jimin, V, and Jung Kook until they complete their military service and safely return. Our company will spare no effort in providing support for our artists," the statement continued. Military service is mandatory in South Korea, where almost all able-bodied men are required to serve in the army for 18 months, by the time they are 28 years old. South Korea's parliament passed a bill in 2020 allowing pop stars, namely those who excel in popular culture and art, to defer their service until the age of 30. In October 2022, the label announced that members of the band would embark on military service, with Jin, the oldest member, the first to start the process. Jin turned 30 in 2022, and the band also announced a break from group musical activities to pursue solo projects in June that year. Members J-Hope and Suga enlisted earlier this year. BTS is expected to reconvene as a group around 2025, according to Big Hit Music. The record label said it has been looking at the timing of the band's military service, to respect the needs of the country. And for these healthy young men, and it said the time was now. BTS formed in 2013 with 7 members RM, Jin, V, J-Hope, Suga, Jimin and Jungkook. The band went on to achieve global fame, with #1 singles in more than 100 countries around the world. In 2022, BTS was the 5th most streamed artist in the world on Spotify, and the most streamed K-pop artist. Falling prices may sound good, but deflation can be dangerous. Here's why. After encountering rapid price increases for more than 2 years, discounts at some stores would certainly feel like a much-needed respite. But business leaders, economists and investment moguls aren't so gung-ho about it. Tech investor Cathie Wood, founder of ARK Investment Management, told the Wall Street Journal in a story published on Wednesday she's more worried about deflation, when prices fall, than the inverse inflation. "We're seeing more and more signs of it," she said, referring to deflation. Falling prices of commodities like copper and lumber negatively impacted Home Depot's third-quarter earnings, CEO Ted Decker told investors on the company's earnings call earlier this week. As an example, on average, framing lumber was approximately $420 per thousand board feet compared to approximately $545 in the third quarter of 2022. Representing a decrease of over 20%, Home Depot's executive vice president of merchandising, Billy Bastick, added on the call. Big-ticket comp transactions, or those over $1,000, were down 5.2% compared to the third quarter of last year, Bastick said. Why aren't people buying more if prices are lower? One of the first lessons students learn in Economics 101 is that when the price of a good is higher, people demand less of it. And when the price of a good is lower, people demand more of it. But the problem with deflation is that when people begin to expect lower prices in the future, they have little incentive to make purchases right now. For instance, unless it was absolutely necessary, why would you buy a new oven today if you thought the price would go down significantly in a month? When enough people think that way, it causes massive pullbacks in spending. That can prompt a recession if it means businesses can't afford to employ as many workers. Deflation isn't widespread in the U.S. Deflation is not a problem across the board in the United States, which, like many countries, is experiencing inflation. In China, however, prices across all goods and services were 0.2% lower in October compared to the same month last year. U.S. consumer prices are 3.2% higher compared to a year ago, according to the latest Consumer Price Index. But even though Americans are still paying more for goods and services compared to a year ago, the pace of the increases has slowed significantly. That said, many goods in the United States are a lot cheaper than they were a year ago. For instance, prices for eggs are 22% lower, the second biggest year-over-year price cut behind health insurance, according to October CPI data. Walmart CEO Doug McMillon said on Thursday consumers could soon encounter more uniform price cuts at grocery stores. He also warned that U.S.-based Walmarts could enter a deflationary environment. Besides eggs, other cheaper goods include airfares, gasoline, appliances and smartphones. Preston Caldwell, chief U.S. economist at Morningstar, referred to this as selective deflation. For now, he said, it's helping to push overall inflation back to the Fed's 2% target with minimal pain in terms of unemployment and lost output. In other words, it's making a soft landing possible, he told CNN. This was a massive week for AI. This was arguably the most momentous week for artificial intelligence since the launch of ChatGPT last year. OpenAI unveiled the latest version of the technology that underpins its viral ChatGPT chatbot. Elon Musk announced a sarcastic AI ChatGPT rival called Grok coming to his platform, X, formerly known as Twitter. There was a Senate subcommittee hearing about AI regulation in the healthcare space. A targeted attack against OpenAI and the first wearable AI device that intends to one day replace the smartphone. These significant announcements are indicative of the speed the AI market is moving at, said Reese Hayden, an analyst at Abbey Research. Hayden noted the week's development exemplified what's unfolding in the industry. AI community continues to balance the risk of unintended consequences by moving too fast, while moving as quickly as possible to remain competitive and innovative. Overall, it was a huge week, Hayden added. Here's a closer look at everything you need to know about the week in AI. OpenAI's Big Day. OpenAI hosted its first developer conference about a year after the launch of ChatGPT, which helped renew an arms race among tech companies to develop and deploy similar AI tools in their products. The company unveiled a series of AI tool updates, including the ability for developers to create custom versions of ChatGPT called GPTs. Similar to plugins, GPTs can connect to databases, be used in emails or facilitate e-commerce orders. CEO Sam Altman, in a few minutes, demonstrated how easy it is for anyone to create a GPT without any prior coding experience. The company is also rolling out a GPT store, starting later this month, to allow GPTs to become searchable. Similar to other app stores, they'll be listed on a leaderboard. And the company will highlight useful tools across categories such as productivity, education and just for fun. Hayden said the announcements, as well as the Apple-like keynote structure and focus on developers, signaled their intention to solve their commercial strategic challenges, which include high costs and limited revenue sources, by building a strong developer ecosystem. Altman also showed off GPT-4 Turbo, the latest version of the technology that powers ChatGPT. He said it now can support input that's equal to about 300 pages of a standard book, about 16 times longer than the previous iteration. Altman shared more about the platform's growth, too. About 2 million developers now use the platform and about 90% of Fortune 500 companies are using the tools internally. It currently has 100 million active users. Humane's AI Pin. Humane, a startup founded by former Apple employees, introduced its first AI wearable device called the AI Pin, a small blinking gadget that attaches to clothing. It intends to eventually replace smartphones by projecting information onto a user's hands, offering the ability to answer phone calls and perform various tasks without holding a smartphone. The company said it also features a handful of AI-powered tools, including the ability to search, send messages and manage email clutter. The AI Pin, which runs on a Snapdragon processor and boasts a Qualcomm AI engine, is packed with depth and motion sensors, features an ultra-wide camera and a laser ink display. Arun Chandrasekaran, an analyst at Gartner, said the unveiling marked an important step in futuristic hardware design for generative and an exploration of a potentially new way of human and machine interaction. Still, it's unclear what adoption could look like. Although the company promises an all-day battery, Hayden said the biggest challenge for on-device AI deployment is battery life. Given that this device is so small and claims to offer multiple different behaviors and use cases and can sense data to inform the model, it will be interesting to see if the battery life is suitable. Other concerns exist too. Always-on AI that collects and processes data will really take a leap of faith from society, which at present most are unlikely to take, Hayden said. The AI Pin, which starts at $699, will go on sale in the U.S. on Thursday, November 16. The arrival of Grok. XAI said in a blog post it took inspiration from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a comedy sci-fi novel by British author Douglas Adams. Grok is designed to answer questions with a bit of wit and has a rebellious streak, so please don't use it if you hate humor. XAI said in the post. Elon Musk's AI startup XAI unveiled a chatbot called Grok for some users of X, which he suggested has a sarcastic sense of humor similar to his own. Musk, who has owned X, formerly known as Twitter, for a year, said Grok is trained by having real-time access to information from the platform. Musk said Grok is still in the early stages of testing but will soon come to X's premium service in the U.S., which includes features such as the blue checkmark for $16 a month. Musk is a co-founder of OpenAI, but stepped down as chairman 5 years ago partly over disagreements about the company's direction. A targeted attack. 2 days after the developer conference, OpenAI experienced large-scale outages to its services, which it later attributed to potential targeted attacks on its servers. The company wrote on its website Wednesday evening that it is dealing with periodic outages due to an abnormal traffic pattern reflective of a DDoS attack. A DDoS attack, or distributed denial of service, typically refers to an attacker that floods an internet server to disrupt normal traffic. Users on Wednesday were unable to access all of OpenAI's tools and services and received a message that the platform was at capacity. The company told CNN no user information was compromised. More on AI. Major tech companies continue to double down on AI too. Reuters reported Amazon is investing millions of dollars on training an AI codenamed Olympus, which is expected to have double the amount of parameters, or building blocks that make AI smarter than OpenAI's GPT-4 model. In addition, YouTube is testing AI tools that answers questions about content, makes recommendations and summarizes topics in the comment sections of videos. Chandrasekaran said that while not all companies will create huge AI models, many will continue to build smaller and specific ones to improve their products, automate tasks and gain a competitive edge. It happened, therefore it was a success. President Joe Biden's summit with China's President Xi Jinping, south of San Francisco Wednesday, may have closed a trap door under the world's most critical diplomatic relationship, which has plunged to its most acrimonious level in 50 years. But with expectations set so deliberately low and with each side having significant incentives to declare the meeting productive, it was hardly an achievement that the mood music was upbeat after 4 hours of talks, punctuated by a lunch of herbed ricotta ravioli, tarragon roasted chicken and almond meringue cake. Biden came away hopeful that he had eased the risks posed by U.S. and Chinese forces operating in perilously close quarters in the Asia-Pacific, which he wants to avoid escalating into yet another politically ruinous global crisis during his re-election bid next year. Xi needed to make a statement to his domestic constituency and the communist hierarchy that he has vital U.S. relations under control at a time of economic strife. He also needed to send a signal that China now sees it in its interest to de-escalate tensions with other major powers, especially the U.S., after a fraught chapter. Yet the important but incremental progress made at the Georgian revival-style mansion will do little to mitigate the underlying factors, driving the U.S. and China toward a more dangerous rivalry. Styling his approach to Xi as trust but verify, Biden explained after the summit that while China and the U.S. were in a competitive relationship, my responsibility is to make it rational and manageable, so it doesn't result in conflict. That's what I'm all about. Xi, while arguing that the world was big enough for both the U.S. and China to coexist, warned that the United States should not scheme to suppress or contain his country, expressing Beijing's belief that the U.S. desire to compete with its rising rival is really aimed at thwarting China's rightful destiny. That's a disconnect that a single summit had no hope of redressing. The two leaders are talking again. An agreement to re-establish contacts between the U.S. and Chinese militaries may be the most important thing Biden does this year. Vital miscalculations on either side can cause real trouble with a country like China or any other major country, Biden told reporters. The potential for U.S. and Chinese naval or air forces to stumble into an incident over or on the South or East China Seas is one of the nightmare national security scenarios that keeps officials and foreign policy analysts awake at night. The United States has, therefore, been trying for months to restore communication, severed by China after then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last year. The Biden administration is worried about scores of what it calls unprofessional operations by Chinese planes and ships near U.S. assets. For instance, a Chinese fighter came within 10 feet of a U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber last month. A downing of a U.S. plane or a collision between ships could set off a dangerous escalation that would be difficult to defuse, not least because of fraught political reactions it would unleash in both countries. The emergency landing of a U.S. spy plane on Hainan Island in 2001, after a collision with a Chinese fighter, took days of intricate diplomacy to resolve and return the crew. China is now far more aggressive, nationalistic and powerful, and a similar incident would be even more combustible. Even in the darkest days of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union maintained contacts to prevent misunderstandings spiraling into Armageddon. And even amid tensions sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, top brass in the Pentagon worked to deconflict their operations with Moscow in war zones like Syria. The absence of such dialogue with China has been startling. Full details of the new military-to-military contacts were not yet available on Wednesday. But the success of such efforts will depend on whether agreements made by Xi filter down to lower levels of the People's Liberation Army forces. And local incidents or wider crises between the U.S. and China could easily reverse Wednesday's limited progress. As happened after Pelosi's Taiwan trip or during the flight of a Chinese spy balloon across the United States earlier this year. But a lowering of the threat of misjudgments or misunderstandings alone may justify Biden's decision to meet Xi. Biden balances his job as commander-in-chief with huge political risks. Biden knew his meeting with Xi would unleash a political firestorm. Just talking to China is enough to trigger claims that the president is appeasing an enemy. Sen. Jim Risch, the top Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, warned as the summit ended that Biden had yet again undermined U.S. national security interests. The Idaho senator added, China is not a normal country, it is an aggressor state. Biden is caving to Xi in exchange for a series of meaningless working groups and engagement mechanisms. Republican presidential candidates have lacerated Biden over his handling of Beijing. They have the luxury of not being responsible for stabilizing the world's most critical diplomatic relationship. And an incentive to misrepresent the intricacies of a complex situation. China bashing has long been a feature of U.S. presidential elections. Dating back at least to Democrat Bill Clinton's 1992 victory over Republican President George H.W. Bush. But the vitriol has been especially stark this year, with GOP candidates like former South Carolina Gov. Nikki Haley and Florida Gov. Ron DeSantis implying that louder rhetoric on its own would force China to bow to U.S. power. Biden had huge political incentives to make this summit a success but also needed to show he was tough on Xi. He cannot afford, for instance, a blow-up with China in his re-election year. Already, the U.S. is stretched as wars rage in Ukraine and the Middle East. More turmoil would fuel GOP claims that he's old and weak and bolster Republican frontrunner Donald Trump's accusations that the world is spiraling out of control under Biden's watch. It was also significant that the first thing Biden said in his news conference was about a deal with Xi to stem the export from China of precursor chemicals for fentanyl that are creating a deadly narcotics epidemic in the U.S. It's one thing for China to agree to curb such activity. It's another for it to act. But Biden will save many lives if the agreement works. And he now has the talking point for the campaign trail. In his news conference, Biden several times stressed he had been blunt with Xi. That's a function of a tense diplomatic relationship. But it's also an insurance policy against GOP claims he's caving to China. Xi faces his own political heat. While he's the most powerful Chinese leader in decades and rules a communist autocracy that allows no dissent, Xi also faces political pressures and constraints to an extent often not appreciated in the U.S. Xi arrived in San Francisco after a period of unusual turmoil in Chinese politics, firing both his foreign and defense ministers in recent months. China's economy, meanwhile, is facing multiple crises, including a collapsing housing market and ballooning youth unemployment. There was an incentive for this meeting to go really well. China's economy is stagnant. They have a lot of troubles at home, Sue Terry, a former George W. Bush and Barack Obama National Security Council official now with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, told CNN's Aaron Burnett. Xi needs to reverse a drain in foreign investment at a time when many U.S. executives and academics question whether fierce Sino-U.S. tensions will threaten their personal security if they even visit the country. This helps explain a charm offensive in the official Chinese media in the hours leading up to the summit. And Xi's meetings with U.S. business executives in San Francisco, and a dinner with American friends he made on a long-ago trip to Iowa as a junior provincial official. Next year will not simply be a turbulent one in U.S.-China relations because of the American presidential election. The Taiwanese election in January will also pose a severe test. Xi came to the summit seeking public reaffirmation from Biden that the U.S. still backs the One China policy, which acknowledges China's position that Taiwan is part of China, but stops short of recognizing Beijing's claim to the self-governing island of 23 million. "I'm not going to change that. That's not going to change," said Biden, who has nevertheless repeatedly irked Beijing by saying he'd defend Taiwan if China attacked. A senior U.S. official said that Xi impressed upon Biden that China wanted peaceful reunification but laid out conditions that would call for the use of force. The official said Xi remarked, "Look, peace is all well and good, but at some point we need to move towards resolution more generally. The fundamentals of the relationship won't change." Expectations were low heading into the summit. And they were met. While both sides want to avoid a disastrous confrontation, the trajectory of U.S.-China relations appears destined to bend toward confrontation, which must be constantly managed to prevent an eruption into open conflict. Washington believes that China is the one nation that can usurp the U.S. as the dominant global power. Biden's formal national security strategy, a document required by Congress, says China is the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and, increasingly, the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it. But Chinese leaders view U.S. actions to balance Beijing's bid to become the leading Indo-Pacific and global nation as attempts to thwart its rightful development and destiny. A recent New York Times analysis of Xi's speeches, for instance, showed that while he has reassured U.S. presidents that he's keen to find areas of cooperation and diffuse geopolitical tensions, he's spoken at home of an inevitable rivalry with a U.S. adversary he views with fatalistic suspicion. In the simultaneous translation of his remarks Wednesday, Xi appeared to imply the strains in the relationship resulted from U.S. attitudes, saying that while conflict and confrontation would have unbearable consequences for both sides, it's unrealistic for one side to remodel the other. A translation of official Chinese script in state media reinforced his point, reading, "It is unrealistic to try to change each other." One interpretation is that Xi is warning against U.S. attempts to moderate Chinese behavior, either domestically on issues like human rights or business or geopolitically in its region and beyond. Biden is correct. It is vital for the presidents of the world's two greatest powers to have a way of communicating in the event that conflict beckons. Both Trump and Biden argued that they had unique understandings and connections with Xi. But does the Chinese leader feel the same way? While Washington often argues that despite irreconcilable strategic goals, the U.S. and China can work together on climate or global security, for instance, Beijing is less publicly effusive about the idea. Right now, opening up slightly to the U.S. appears to be in Xi's interests. But the forces driving the powers toward further confrontation are broad and volatile. Meeting low bars at a moderately successful summit will not change the fundamentals of their rivalry.